The Subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific will now come to order. The story of Burma is a heartbreaking tale of needless suffering and unnecessary sorrow. It is the story of a people forced to survive in abject poverty at the hands of dictators, despite living in a country abundant in natural resources. Indeed, for more than a century, the story of Burma has been divided into two main chapters. The first takes place in the era of colonialism, and the second spans the painful evolution of a brutal military dictatorship. Of course, the era of independent rule in Burma has been only a footnote in its history, a mere blink of an eye, spanning only 14 years before she was again robbed of her freedom. The reason I opened today's hearing with a look back into Burma's history is to remind us all that we must never forget a people who, at no fault of their own, have been deprived of so much. This includes the ethnic minorities who live in constant fear, and of course the political prisoners who languish behind bars to this day. This is the real story of Burma, and these are the reasons why members of Congress are dedicated to promoting true reform in that country. To date, we know far too little about what is actually going on in Burma. Beyond the news stories, information is far too scarce, and far from what we do know, very little can be inferred. On April 1st of 2012, the Burmese regime held parliamentary by-elections in which Burma's legendary leader, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, and the National League of Democracy, the NLD, won 43 out of 45 open seats. Regardless of whether we view an election of but 7% of Burma's legislative body as real reform, the elections nevertheless cap an impressive year of progress made by the secretive military regime. The question that we face today is whether these activities of the past year represent real reform or modest window dressing. If this is real reform, what steps are needed to protect progress made and promote additional steps? Have our European and Asian allies gone too far by rushing headlong into suspending all sanctions and immediately boosting assistance? At the same time, the list of problems that Burma continues to face is extensive. Approximately 600 political prisoners remain behind bars. And in spite of news reports to the contrary, there's evidence that a civil war continues to rage in the ethnic areas. And in Kachin State, anecdotal evidence from refugees and outside visitors point to serious human rights abuses being carried out by the military. This has led to a serious humanitarian crisis and has forced tens of thousands of people to flee their homes and villages. Rule of law in Burma continues to be non-existent, with cronyism and bribery ruling the day. If the example of other resource-rich countries is applied to Burma, then military establishment and corrupt officials stand to reap an enormous windfall from the revenue that Burma's rich natural resources promise to generate. The people of Burma will see next to nothing and remain locked in the repeating cycle of poverty. If the U.S. inadvertently contributes to this cycle of corruption by recklessly removing sanctions, then a generation's worth of efforts by human rights champions will be wasted. We must not let this happen. America's policy on Burma has long been guided by policymakers on both sides of the aisle. I joined my good friend and colleague Joe Crowley from New York to pass the Congressional Gold Medal Act for Aung San Suu Kyi in 2008, and was also the lead Republican in renewing congressional sanctions against Burma. I spoke out forcefully against the brutal crackdown of the Saffron Revolution and its aftermath. Last year, Aung San Suu Kyi delivered recorded testimony before the Subcommittee on Conditions in Burma and urged Congress to continue supporting her beloved country. I championed the cause of freedom in Burma, not because it was politically advantageous, but because it was the right thing to do. I commend the administration for returning an ambassador to Burma and for USAID's reopening of its mission there. More than anything, we need Americans on the ground assessing what is actually happening. But now we face the next step in this journey. It is my sincere hope that these actions in Burma are the beginning of real, meaningful political reconciliation. However, let us not lose sight of the reality that Burma has endured 50 years of military dictatorship, and those in power will not give up this power overnight. I now recognize the ranking member for his opening statement. Mr. Falma Vega.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing on U.S. policy towards Myanmar. I applaud your leadership and want you to know I am honored to serve with you. This subcommittee, House of Representatives, and your constituents have all been well represented by you. At home and abroad, you will be missed. Last year, Myanmar has demonstrated that it is on the path towards democratic reform, and I am pleased by these developments. I am especially pleased that President Obama sent Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to Myanmar in December of last year. Secretary Clinton was the first high-ranking member of any American administration to visit Myanmar since World War II. And Mr. Chairman, I'm also pleased and honored that we have with us as our witness, a gentleman whom I've had the privilege of working with also is our Assistant Secretary of State of East Asian Pacific Affairs, my good friend Kurt Campbell, who has also been doing a fantastic job as part of the administration's engagement policy from the very beginning in terms of what they have done in the past 3 years in dealing with the leaders of Myanmar. And Mr. Campbell certainly is tributed for doing all the tremendous work, legwork, in bringing to pass these developments, and especially having Secretary Clinton visited the leaders of that country, and especially Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi. During her visit, Secretary Clinton praised President Thein Sein's leadership and courage, and so do I. President Thein has authorized 4 separate amnesties for groups of prisoners since May of last year. For the first time in 22 years, Aung San Suu Kyi at the National League for Democracy participated in the April 1st, 2012 by-elections and won 44 out of the 45 seats up for election. Under our new policy of engagement, the United States will name an ambassador to Myanmar and establish USAID presence. We will ease sanctions on agricultural, tourism, telecommunications, and banking. Furthermore, international response to U.S. leadership has been positive. Australia announced that it would lift sanctions. Japan decided it will waive Myanmar's debt. The EU announced its decision to suspend trade, economic, and individual sanctions against Myanmar for 1 year. These are welcoming developments, and I commend President Obama, Secretary Clinton, and Assistant Secretary Kurt Campbell for moving full speed ahead in a policy of pragmatic engagement. This is the course of direction the U.S. should be taking. I look forward, Mr. Chairman, to hearing from our witnesses, Secretary Campbell and Ms. Biswal, and I want to note for the record that my dear friend and colleague, Congressman Joe Crowley of New York, who has been a strong advocate for reform in Myanmar. At his request, our Democratic witness is the Honorable Tom Andrews, former member of Congress and President and CEO of the United to End Genocide. On behalf of Representative Crowley, I welcome you, and once more, I commend Chairman Manzullo, gentlemen, for holding this important hearing. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Royce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the past year, Burma has seemingly opened itself up to change. Prisoners of conscience, as you know, have been released there now. Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy Party was allowed to participate in the elections. Governments around the world are of course, quite optimistic. The EU is suspending sanctions. Australia has pledged to lift its sanctions. We have a situation where Japan has waived the debt, the $3.7 billion of Burmese debt. But at the end of the day, I think we can say that Burma's motives are somewhat unclear in this. Some of the speculation has been that the regime no longer wanted to be a wholly owned subsidiary of Beijing, and that that drove some of it. I'll be interested in hearing the witnesses' observation and what the administration believe is driving this, but it is interesting. The administration has also struck a similarly optimistic tone with the rest of the international community on this, and we're moving quickly towards pragmatic engagement there with the Burmese government, laying out plans for a fully accredited ambassador now in Rangoon and plans for a presence of USAID, which is appropriate. However, I think that we would be wise to remain cautious. Progress this is, but progress can be quickly reversed. And although we enjoyed watching that election and 44 seats out of 45 going to the National League for Democracy Party, at the end of the day, that is still a small percentage, a sliver of that 664 seats that are in the parliament there. Our increased engagement with the Burmese government must be accompanied, I think, by a push for engagement with civil society, which can be empowering for civil society there. And I think what should be at the center of this relationship is not only a long-term view about engaging civil society, but the Burmese people. If we keep that in mind, making that the center of the relationship, that's where we're going to do the most good. Lastly, I think Burma's positive relationship with North Korea is a vexing and an odd thing that shouldn't be taken lightly. The extent of the proliferation network between those two countries is still murky, but we know some of the history of it. And cutting this tie to North Korea, I think, should also be a priority in the relationship. But I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Congressman Rohrabacher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a wonderful celebration today of many years. I know for myself, I've been engaged in this for about 24 years. A lot of people understand that right after I was elected to Congress, I went to Afghanistan I disappeared, went to Afghanistan for 2 months and fought alongside the Mujahideen. But what they don't also understand is on my way to Afghanistan, I went to Burma and met with the Burmese students in the jungle who were at that time, even then in 1988, resisting and fighting the junta that was repressing their people in Afghanistan, in Burma. And I remember walking away from that that meeting. Pardon me, I just came back from overseas last night, so I'm a little bit weary here. But I'll try to get my words out right. The fact is that when I left those meetings in the jungle in Burma, I was so impressed with these young people. And I remember, while I was impressed, certainly, yes, by the courage and the fighting which I saw in Afghanistan, but the idealism of those young people in Burma, I knew that someday, if they held true to that, they would triumph. And this is a triumph for the idealism of the Burmese people. And they did not succumb to the type of mass bloodshed on their side as many people who are struggling for freedom have been gotten into over the years and not been successful. Let us note, in terms of American policy, so first of all, this is a great success for the Burmese people, the idealists among the Burmese people, but it also is a reflection on American policy. We did not, in Burma, become engaged, we did not put forth a policy of engagement. This was not. This is coming about now is not coming about because the United States government decided to treat the Burmese government as if it wasn't a vicious dictatorship that was murdering its own people. In fact, we tried to isolate them and used economic sanctions instead of trying to make them feel that they could be part of the family of nations, even though they were a corrupt dictatorship. Well, in the end, that policy has worked. The policy of basically treating a dictatorship like it's different than a democracy and not giving them the same trading and economic privileges that we have with democratic nations. I think now is the time we should move forward and make sure that we start opening up those opportunities. As they make their concessions, we should do step by step, make theirs. And Mr. Chairman, one last point, and that is, let's not forget that there are still tribal groups along the border in Burma, the ethnic peoples who are still under attack and being murdered by the central government. They need to be brought into this process of reconciliation as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Congressman Crowley.
Thank you, Chairman Manzullo, and thank you for allowing me to sit in on my former committee here in Foreign Affairs. And thank you for allowing me to participate today. I was fortunate to travel to Burma in January while I was on a trip to India, and I had the opportunity to meet with both the military government and the opposition led by Aung San Suu Kyi. I also met with families of political prisoners and some members of ethnic minority groups. I am deeply appreciative to all those at the State Department who helped me on that trip, in particular Secretary Clinton. I also appreciate the time spent on Burma by this administration. It has been enormous amount of time, I think, and a good amount of time on this. And I also want to recognize the work of former First Lady Bush and President Bush's attention to this issue as well. After all, it was this committee that created many of the sanctions and also the position of the Special Envoy on Burma through the Burmese Jade Act, which was an act that I was proud to be the sponsor of. I walked away from Burma with three distinct impressions, and those impressions inform my view that a lot of the media coverage around Burma lately has been overheated, if not slightly overstated. First, those who are struggling to end military rule in Burma are among the bravest heroes in the world today. They are risking their lives for values that we share as Americans and sometimes take for granted, and they deserve our respect and our admiration. Second, human rights abuses in Burma are still going on. There are still several hundred, if not more, political prisoners locked up behind bars in Burma. Serious acts of violence against ethnic nationalities have continued. In fact, many attacks on ethnic minorities have taken place even after the April 1st by-election. Third, the Democratic opposition has won only a small political arena to operate, about 6% of the national parliament. The opposition holds no real power in this parliament, other than the power of, hopefully, persuasion. There is no real rule of law to constrain government behavior, and the military still seems to run a lot of the show in Burma. Now, I don't want to be viewed as one who's here to throw cold water. That's not my intention. But for all these reasons, I believe we must be careful to not lift sanctions too quickly. We should not hesitate if it is necessary to impose even more. The steps already taken by the United States have been substantial, and there's no need to rush to judgment. Groups working in conflict areas report that it may even be more likely that lifting some of the sanctions could increase conflict within Burma. It's no secret that the vast majority of extractive industries in Burma are owned and operated either by members of the military, former leaders of the military, or their cronies. There is nothing they want more than to sweep into ethnic areas and steal the plentiful and natural resources within. If we give up all of our leverage through lifting more sanctions, what do we have to push for an end to these attacks? So let's continue some pressure. We can match action with action, but we should be cautious and skeptical so that we don't write simply a blank check. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I once again thank you, and I thank our witnesses here today.
Thank you. Our witnesses are first, Secretary Kurt Campbell became the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs in 2009. Previously, he was the CEO and co-founder of the Center for New American Security and concurrently served as the director of the Aspen Strategy Group and chairman of the editorial board of the Washington Quarterly. He was the founder of Strat Asia, a strategic advisory firm, and was the senior vice president director of the International Security Program and Henry A. Kissinger Chair in National Security Policy at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Dr. Campbell has served in several capacities in government, including as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia and the Pacific, a director on the National Security Council staff, Deputy Special Counselor to the President for NAFTA in the White House, and White House Fellow at the Department of the Treasury. He received his BA from the University of California, San Diego, and his doctorate in international relations from Brasenose College at Oxford University. Nisha Biswell was sworn in as USAID's Assistant Administrator for Asia on September 20th, 2010. Prior to her appointment, she served as the Majority Clerk for the State Department and Foreign Operations Subcommittee on the Committee on Appropriations in the U.S. House of Representatives. In this capacity, she provided staff support to Appropriations Committee Chairman David Obey and Subcommittee Chairwoman Nita Lowy in managing the appropriations and oversight of the U.S. international affairs budget. She's also served as professional staff on the House International Relations Committee. That's your most famous post, right? Ms. Bisbal holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Virginia. Welcome, Secretary Campbell. Welcome, Administrator Bisbal. Let's start first with Secretary Campbell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And just to save time, I know we have so much interest here. I'd like to ask that my full statement be submitted for the record, and then we can proceed accordingly.
Without objection, the statements of both witnesses, of all the witnesses, will be submitted for the record.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say, if I may, at the outset, a word of thanks to all of you for some specific issues. As you know, Mr. Chairman, we were both in New Zealand during the earthquake, and working with you in the aftermath of that, I want to tell you we're very proud working with private groups that the United States has been by far and away the largest contributor to the rebuilding of the devastated city of Christchurch, and you've played an instrumental role in that. I want to thank you. Congressman Falio-Mavinga has been an ardent supporter of renewed engagement in the Pacific. Too often when we say Asia-Pacific, P is the small p, and he has been a constant reminder of our need to do more there, and I want to thank him for that, for his encouragement and his support. Congressman Royce, in particular, you have helped us so much in our relationship with the Philippines. I'm proud to say on Monday we'll be hosting the first ever 2+2 with our Filipino friends. We must do more with our allies in the Pacific, and you have been a consistent reminder of that. Congressman Crowley, you've been our conscience on so much of what we've done in Asia, and I appreciate your support and your reminder not to forget about those that are still struggling mightily in Asia, and particularly in Burma. And Congressman Rohrabacher, you've been our conscience on security issues often, sometimes reminding us about stuff that goes on that we must not turn our head away from. So for all of you, we're grateful for your support and engagement on the Asian Pacific region. I want to also underscore that there is scarcely a word said by any of you that we would disagree with. So I just want to underscore that, again, the hallmark of our policy in Burma has been two essential features. I would say actually three. The first is that it has been bipartisan. And we seek, and I want to commit to you that we want to maintain that bipartisan commitment and dialogue going forward. Secondly, it is part of a partnership between the executive and legislative branches. The legislative branch has really led the way, has reminded us of the importance of Burma, even when we're focused on other things, and we've been very grateful for that. And then the third dimension is the need to consult and coordinate closely with international friends. We spend an enormous amount of time working with our friends in Europe, in Asia, in Japan, in Australia, in New Zealand, to ensure that we are as well coordinated as possible in terms of our overall approach. So overall, I think that what we heard just now from you was balanced and careful, and I just want to underscore that that is our overall approach. I think Congressman Crowley did underscore that there has been some overheated rhetoric. I hope that has not come from the administration. In fact, I think we have tried to be clear from the beginning of an effort of dialogue in 2009 to acknowledge areas of very deep disappointment. And in fact, for about 2 years, we were probably the first to say that we were making absolutely no progress. But in fact, over the course of the last several months, we have seen dramatic developments taking place inside the country that no one would have imagined. Aung San Suu Kyi has been elected in, albeit an imperfect election, to Parliament. Just a few months ago, she was under house arrest. We believe that there is real significant progress underway inside the country, but I want to quote what Secretary Clinton has said. We believe that it is fragile and reversible. The future in Burma is neither clear nor certain, and therefore we need to carefully calibrate our approach to encourage continued progress. I want to assure you that in every single meeting we have, both with officials in the country, with representatives from ethnic groups and from civil society, and all of our interlocutors in Asia, in Europe, and elsewhere, that we do acknowledge the changes that are taking place, but we also say very clearly and firmly that much more needs to be done. They are on the first stages of what we hope will be a very long journey, but much more needs to be done with unconditional releases of political prisoners, much more work in terms of advances of civil society, the legislative and legal frameworks of a well-functioning, open society, the relationship that Congressman Royce raised between Burma and North Korea. We are seeking a full discontinuance of that relationship. On the military side, countries are judged by the company they keep, and we think that is extremely important going forward. And we are also determined to work diplomatically in every area that is of continuing concern between the United States and indeed the international community and the country itself. I believe what we have laid out is a very careful, calibrated, step-by-step approach that rewards action for action. And I just want to suggest that any steps that we take, any easing, will be done in very close consultation with Congress, in close consultation within the U.S. government between the White House, the State Department, the Department of Defense, and particularly the Treasury Department, to ensure that it is done carefully and responsibly. And we recognize very clearly that there have to be provisions and capabilities to be able to respond if there is a reversal or a stalling out. That leverage is an essential component of our strategy, and pressure will be needed in a number of circumstances going forward. So my own personal view is that this is indeed a welcome, historic opening. I would disagree slightly with my friend Congressman Rohrbacher. I think it does have to do with what the international community has done. I believe the solidarity of friends in Europe, in the United States, not just in governments, but in groups that have persevered and kept conscience with people inside the country, have made an enormous difference, and that needs to continue going forward. And I just want to underscore, anyone who says that this is the end of the game is not paying attention. We are at the very beginning stages of a process that will demand intense American engagement, no gauzy gaze and rose-colored glasses, a true understanding that the steps that we take must be in the larger pursuit of systemic reforms and progress for the people, not the cronies. And I just want to commit to you that as we go forward, we will do everything possible to work with you to make sure that we do this in consultation. And I also want to thank my friend and colleague, Anisha Biswal. I cannot imagine a better person to be working with this effort on. Thank you.
Thank you. Administrator Biswal?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Faluma Vega, members of the committee. It is always a pleasure, an honor, and a thrill for me to testify before this committee, since I spent so much time sitting behind the members in preparing for hearings in the past. I do want to follow in the steps of my esteemed colleague, Kurt Campbell, and just touch upon a few key priorities and next steps on the USAID assistance program so that we may preserve the balance of the time to answer questions and engage in discussion. USAID has a long history with Burma, and indeed the U.S. relationship predates the establishment of USAID, as the assistance relationship began in 1950. But we have not had a mission there since 1988 and the fateful events of that year. In the meantime, we have been stalwart in our support for the Burmese people through our humanitarian assistance programs inside and outside of Burma, as well as our support for democracy, human rights, independent media, and the like. But since about 2010, we've maintained a $38 million program of assistance, bilateral assistance through USAID, both along the Thai-Burma border as well as inside Burma. The opportunity we have today is an opportunity to, through the establishment of an aid mission, more directly engage with the people of Burma, more directly support the reforms through support for the civil society and for reform-minded institutions, to support efforts for reconciliation and to engage more efficiently with other donors as we move forward. That, first and foremost, is why we want to establish that mission, and that is our operating procedure moving forward. We hope to have, by the fall of this year, the first U.S. Direct hire mission director in country, and to have a fully staffed mission by next summer. It'll be a small presence, but it will enable us to engage and assess far more directly than we've been able to heretofore. Our priorities for assistance really are focused on supporting political reform, for supporting civil society institutions, which, though informal and nascent, have been very, very resilient in meeting the urgent needs of the Burmese people. We believe that those civil society institutions are going to be critical for reform to really take root and to penetrate across all levels of society, particularly as we look forward to 2015. We also believe that the critical need on the government side is to really have a greater technical capability and understanding of democratic governance. Even for those who are engaging aggressively on the path to reform, the greatest thing that we hear from them is the lack of capacity that is hindering institutions in Burma on the path forward, whether that's leaders of parliament, whether that's ministries or things like the Elections Commission and the like. And finally, as I noted, ethnic reconciliation is a major, major area of importance and of concern. The path to development cannot go far until and unless the needs and conditions of the ethnic minorities are addressed. And we are working with other donors to see what we can do to support national reconciliation, but in the meantime also maintain our support for the urgent needs of those vulnerable populations that are most affected by ongoing conflicts. And finally, I would just like to note that Congress has had an important role, as Secretary Campbell noted, in U.S. policy towards Burma. USAID has worked very, very closely with Congress on how we move forward, and I want to commit to you that it is our intention to continue to do that as we move forward. I want to thank you very much for this opportunity and open ourselves up now to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony. Let's talk about the sanctions that have been lifted and the sanctions that may be lifted, and what are the next steps on lifting those sanctions, including the timeline, and how do we keep pressure on Burma if we lift the sanctions? Do you want to go first, Mr. Secretary?
Thank you very much, Congressman. I can give you a general answer to your very good question. Some of the particulars and specifics I would urge in another setting to talk with our colleagues in OFAC and Treasury that are responsible for the details. I would simply say that there is no intention to, quote, quote, lift sanctions. I think in certain prescribed areas, we will seek to ease sanctions by using executive authorities, but we would intend to do that in close consultation with key players on Capitol Hill, including this body. I think our desire is to focus on those areas, and I'm not going to get how we do this precisely, obviously, will be to maintain clear criteria in terms of entities and individuals that are precluded from interactions because of prior associations. We will continue to enforce those prohibitions. We will update the list as necessary, and we will also work in areas that we think have the greatest potential to lift the lives of the people inside the country. We recognize fully that to date, the reforms, to the extent that they have taken effect, have been primarily in urban areas and, in fact, Burman areas, and that other ethnic areas, in fact, have told us quite clearly that they see very little change on the ground. So we need to ensure that that process extends into the country as a whole, and we are troubled by very clear and we believe reliable reports of continuing attacks and atrocities that are completely antithetical to the overall effort that we're seeking to achieve inside the country. I want to say that this will be a protracted process, almost invariably, because, first of all, the complexity of the sanctions involved, the desire that we have to ensure that we do this in consultation with colleagues on Capitol Hill, and also to do this the right way. The real challenge, I think, going forward right now is the potential for a small country with very little infrastructure to be absolutely overwhelmed by outside engagement. And so we want to do this in a careful way. We do believe that American firms have the appropriate kind of corporate governance and the right values to promote better and more responsible actions inside the country. And we will seek to do this in a manner that the kinds of sanctions easing that we have in mind will actually assist reforms rather than undermine them.
Do you have a response to that?
I think that Secretary Campbell covered the waterfront on this. I only would note that one of the actions that we've taken more immediately is to ease the restrictions on nonprofit organizations so that they may engage more robustly in supporting the Burmese people.
I would say, I'm sorry, I apologize, Congressman, I didn't mention this. We have taken a couple of steps that we think are important. We are seeking to ease travel restrictions on certain officials. So we want to be able to invite key players inside the government, like the foreign minister. The health minister was just here, to come to Washington for consultations, to engage with us on areas where we think more work is necessary and where we can support them going forward.
Thank you. Congressman Falama Vega.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps we're dealing with semantics, Mr. Secretary, but I just wanted to make sure if we make reference to the colonial legacy of the British towards Myanmar, we call it Burma. Yeah. But every country that I know among the ASEAN countries always make reference to this country as Myanmar and not Burma. What is the official designation by the administration? We're going to call them Burma and remind the world community of its British colonial legacy, or we're going to call it Myanmar. What is the correct designation of this country?
Thank you, Congressman. You always have the questions that are based in deep knowledge of the circumstances. It is the practice of the U.S. government and one other government currently to use the official term of Burma as the reference to the country. As you suggest, most countries in the world, ASEAN, Asia, many countries in Europe, and almost all newspapers and other official sites use the term Myanmar. And indeed, even inside the country, strong supporters of the NLD, when writing the country down, use the term Myanmar as a whole. I would simply say that is our policy, and we have had deliberations with key stakeholders inside the country and elsewhere, and I think it will be a subject of discussions going forward.
My colleague, Congressman Royce, had raised the point that I wanted to ask you also, Mr. Secretary. The shift by the current administration or the government of Myanmar towards these reforms, like allowing Aung San Suu Kyi to participate in the election to bring about more democratic reforms. Of course, a lot of pundits have also said that the current government kind of wants to play both sides, not necessarily in the pockets of the Chinese, but try to also work with the Western, our side of the fence, so to speak. So, or is it because it's just time to change? My understanding historically is that the reason for the presence of the military is because you had 5, 7, or 8 states that are constantly killing each other from its history. There was never a united Myanmar, so to speak. And apparently the only party that really was able to finally put everybody together was the military. Please correct me if I'm wrong on this historical. And I always say with fond memory in the early 60s, as a high school student, I always remember the name U Thant as the former Secretary General of the United Nations coming from Myanmar. And then all of a sudden we just kind of not hear any more about Myanmar. But I really would appreciate, for the record, historically, why we ended up with the military taking control. It's my understanding the factions among the 7 provinces or states, or 8 or 9, are constantly killing each other. A form of anarchy, if you will, and correct me if I'm wrong on this.
Thank you, Congressman. I probably would more closely associate myself with the reference that the chairman made, that this is a country with a long and tragic history. Right. I also believe that the true path to reconciliation will require ethnic reconciliation, that there have been important steps that have been taken in urban settings, but ultimately how power, how authority is dealt with in ethnic areas, how these long-running, some of them over half a century, conflicts are resolved will be key to the country's future. I have to say, I do believe the government has attempted to take steps in a certain number of situations, ethnic situations, to try to deal directly with the problems, which are entrenched and long-standing. And we have seen some progress, but there is also areas where we've seen continuing violence that is reprehensible and must be addressed going forward. To your earlier question about why this leadership has decided to reach out and also take steps inside the country, and this refers back to the excellent point that Congressman Royce and Congressman Rohrbacher raised. You know, in truth, as one could never know fundamentally what motivates a government or people to do things, my sense that it is often a complex number of reasons why formal decisions or decisions are taken. I will say this, that it is well known and understood in Asia that 50 years ago, the richest, the most productive, the most, the country with the most impressive potential future in Asia was Burma. And today, it is probably, if not the most backward, among the most backward, not just in Asia, but globally. I believe that some of the leaders have had more experience traveling in ASEAN, traveling in Asia, and they have seen how far their government and their country has fallen behind. And I also am of a view that there are people inside the government, the current government, that are people of courage and of goodwill that want to do what they can to support their people and their country. I think a big motivation is an attempt to bring this country into the 21st century and to move away from a history that has been clouded by violence, repression, and a lack of opportunity. And I think if the United States can help play a role along that path, we will be historically, over time, I think, rewarded.
I just want to say, in closing, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, that I also have to give credit to the members of the ASEAN Association for having a lot of influence on the leaders of Myanmar to do what they're doing now. Thank you.
Congressman Royce?
I think one of the realities, though, in terms of we're talking about the military government there, and you have a government where 60% of the GDP ends up in the hands of the government. And Burma, as we think about its history, as we think about the educational system there, and how impressive that was, and now you have what 2-3% of the GDP going for education. You've literally had an implosion within the society of other of anything related to civil society or private ownership or related to institutions like education. And what's happened in place of it is this enormous transfer of resources into one sector of the society, which then can hand out franchises to the officer corps or whatever. But that, in fact, is what's happened in the last few generations and the last generation. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is, given the small number of percentage of seats that were in play here, is this something that was done to placate the international community? Would circumstances really have been different if more was politically at stake in terms of a real presence there in the parliament? Just to get your thoughts on that. And then the other thing, Mr. Secretary, that I wanted to ask about, there are these talks about a third test in North Korea being imminent, and yet the president of Burma, Thein Sein, had this to say. He reiterated his support for Kim Jong-un, saying, "I'm convinced that the friendship and close cooperation between Myanmar and DPRK would continue to develop," unquote. This is the type of message you get out of some pretty odd actors on the world stage who've embraced North Korea, and it puts Burma in company, in league with some characters that don't exactly comply with international norms of behavior. And I was just going to ask you what else you could tell us about that relationship.
Thank you again, Congressman Royce. Just to your first observations about the plundering that has taken place inside the country, I would just add just a point to what you said, which is it has not just enriched some of the cronies, but frankly, we think some of the international deals that have been struck, frankly, have robbed Burma of its natural heritage. And we would like to see a set of internal checks and balances, and frankly, supported by the international financial institutions, the multilateral development banks, to ensure that the development that takes place going forward serves the interests of the people of the country. And we think that's an extraordinarily important dimension going forward. And by the way, we will only be able to affect that if we're more in the game. So I believe that is also one of the reasons why a certain careful, calibrated engagement is in our best interests. I also suggest that I think that what will be critical in any sanctions easing will be to underscore publicly and in all our circumstances that those that have been associated particularly with past misdeeds will be prohibited from economic activities and other kinds of engagements financially and the like with the United States and our partners. And we've worked very closely to ensure that these various steps are going to be adopted, we believe, among many of the countries in Europe and elsewhere that will go forward with engagement. On your last point, I don't really have much to say beyond full agreement with what you say about North Korea. And I just want to say publicly what we have said privately to China, to South Korea, to every country in Asia who has focused on their engagement strategy with Burma, that a limiting factor in our engagement will be the future direction of their military relationship with the DPRK, and that if they continue to take steps that are antithetical to UN Security Council relations, that will put a brake on the kind of engagement that we seek between our two countries. And I can't say it any more directly, that countries are judged by the company they keep. And so we fully agree, Congressman Royce, with your concerns in this regard.
Yeah, if I could just end with one point, Mr. Chairman. Shifting countries for a minute, I want to thank you for your good work, the progress we're making with an old ally, with the Philippines. One area of concern, though, is the sale of public lands, especially when Filipino Americans are hurt, and I had a chance to talk to you a little bit about this prior to the meeting, but I look forward to working with you on it, and I thank you again, Mr. Secretary.
I'd like to commit publicly that we will work with you on this issue and raise it with our Philippine colleagues and friends.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. There were a number of meetings that took place in the short period, the 2 days that I spent in Burma. One meeting, I think one of the most extraordinary women I've ever had the opportunity to meet, Aung San Suu Kyi. But also, prior to that meeting, a meeting that I had with the families of prisoners of conscience, many of whom were released the day after, or the day I was leaving Burma. Many of those families were reunited. I just would like to get a sense from you, something I just want to say about those families momentarily. The absence of revenge was palpable. It was so evident that these people, the deprivation they've been through, their families, the torture, the being in prison in Burma is probably one of the worst places in the world to be incarcerated. And yet the total absence of revenge that I sensed from these families and former prisoners as well. Do we have a sense of how many prisoners are still incarcerated in Burma who are prisoners of political conscience? And what is the administration doing to secure the release? And is the UN doing anything to secure the release with the soon-to-be visit by the Secretary General?
Thank you. I think I can address that question, Congressman. Can I just say my own personal observation? I noted the same thing, and I've had a number of meetings with family members and those that have recently been released. I took something else which was just incredible. I have never met a group of people that had that strength of mind and appeared ready to play a role in as they return to society. And one of the things that I'd ask Congress to look at, perhaps working with USAID or some other institutions, it's very clear that it is challenging for some of these hundreds of people that are returning back into public life to find roles in society. Some have been outside of, behind bars or imprisoned for decades. And I think we need to do more to support these people, to help them. And we've been working with private foundations and the like. But frankly, your attention to this, your support to this makes a huge difference. So what you could do to help along those lines would be terrific. One of our efforts, we believe a very large percentage of the most high-profile prisoners have been released. Not all of them unconditionally, a point that we make in every single meeting with authorities, that we seek those unconditional releases. We are beginning a bilateral dialogue, a multilateral dialogue, and we have worked with the United Nations to have a sense of what number and what kind of prisoners of conscience remain in prison. I would hate to give you an exact number because I don't think we know, but we will not rest until we achieve a full and accountable release of all the political prisoners inside the country.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ms. Biswell, just on terms of USAID in the conflict areas of the Kachin State as well as Northern Shan State, it has created a humanitarian crisis. There are over 75,000 displaced civilians, and they're in desperate need of assistance and help. What is USAID providing in terms of assistance to these refugees? And will USAID begin to address the life and death needs of the displaced Kachin as well?
Thank you very much, Mr. Crowley. And before I answer your question, I just also wanted to note that I had the opportunity a few weeks ago to visit Burma and had an opportunity to meet both with Aung San Suu Kyi and with many of the 88 generation political prisoners who'd been released. And it's remarkable that not only do we have an extraordinary leader in Dasu, but that there are so many extraordinary individuals in Burma that give cause for optimism for that country's future. With respect to what we are doing and will continue to do with respect to humanitarian needs inside Burma, along the borders, in the ethnic areas and such, we have provided over the years assistance through the Thai-Burma Border Consortium to refugees and displaced in that Thai-Burma border. We've been seeking to gain access into the Kachin areas for our assessment teams so that we can try to not only get a better handle on the humanitarian needs, but also the institutions that may be able to partner with us in supporting and addressing some of those needs. The Department of State's Bureau for Population, Refugees, and Migration did recently put forward assistance through the UNHCR specifically for Kachin, and UNHCR is right now also engaging in partnerships with some of the local institutions to try to get aid into the Kachin area. It's been difficult, and we continue to press that in all of our conversations with the government, and we continue to meet very aggressively with the humanitarian community to see how we can expand access and assistance into that area.
Thank you. Congressman Rohrabacher?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me sit in today. I'm not a member of this subcommittee, although I've been active on many of the issues we've been talking about. Let me just have a couple, housekeeping chores here in terms of wording. When I talk about engagement, I have always personally been engaged with the people and expect our government to be engaged with the people of Burma and other repressed peoples. That's where engagement belongs, not, for example, we did not engage the Soviet Union by giving it most favored nation status, but we engaged with China and provided most favored nation status. And where did that engagement get us? There's been no liberalization in China whatsoever. They're still the world's worst human rights abuser. And in the Soviet Union, it has disappeared, and they have gone through massive reform. I also have sat through decades of the business community lobbying this Congress to try to get us to lift the economic sanctions when the repression was at its worst in Burma. And there was no reform. The business community wanted to make money. So, surprise, surprise, businessmen don't care about human rights, they want to make money. Well, let's recognize that. And engagement with those businessmen making money has nothing to do with making it a freer society, and in fact, I argue just the opposite. We should not be having free trade with dictatorships. Free trade between free people is wonderful. Free trade with dictatorship strengthens the dictatorship. Furthermore, I would like to respectfully disagree with my friend Mr. Falamawega. The Burmese junta did not take over to stop killing, and they did not have some benevolent motive in mind. They have killed and murdered more people than the ethnic groups were killing each other. And yes, there was a great deal of conflict that went on in that country, but nowhere near the organized slaughter that has taken place by the Burmese dictatorship, which was the worst in the world. When they started calling Burma Myanmar was after 1988, when the junta assumed total control of that society after they reneged on agreeing with free elections. That's when the word Myanmar, so that they could hide the fact that people don't even know what they're taught, who's being criticized when you use the word Myanmar. Most of the people in the world didn't even know what that meant. That's why the world has changed. And now that we're going towards reform, I think it's a good idea we start calling them Myanmar. Let's start rewarding them, and let's start engaging with them, and really engaging with them. But let's do so in a way that if they start going backwards, that there's a price to pay. I would suggest, and I know this is another outrageous Rohrabacher suggestion, let's give amnesty to all of them. No matter what crimes they have committed against their people, let's give amnesty and just say blanket amnesty to everybody. But those people who continue to commit crimes after this lose that amnesty. That we will say, if you want to start operating as we do in a decent society, in a democratic society, we're with you. We don't care what they say you did in the last 10 years. But if you start getting engaged again in slaughtering the people, the tribal groups out in the Kachins or the Karins or whatever, that amnesty is going to be withdrawn. Let's make sure there's a penalty to go the wrong way, and let's give them all the incentive to go the right way. And we need, and again, I think we should be celebrating. This is a tremendous breakthrough. This is a victory for the honorable people and the idealists of Myanmar. And it's also, I might add, it's a defeat for China, and it should be taken that way. This is a major country that was being given to the Chinese. They were raping, the Chinese were raping the natural resources of that country in exchange for arming the junta that oppressed the people. They have broken away from that cycle. That is a magnificent achievement for humankind. And maybe either of you would like to comment on that diatribe or whatever it was.
I think I'll just reflect on it for a while. Thank you, Chris.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
He doesn't want to engage with me.
Mr. Chairman, with the gentleman here for a moment,
Certainly.
he should refrain from self-diagnosis. I don't believe he's an MD or a doctor or a psychiatrist, so I just want to make that point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you for your testimony, Secretary Campbell and Administrator Bisbal. We appreciate your coming here this afternoon, and then we can prepare for the second panel. Thank you.
That's right. There you go.
If we could have the next panel of witnesses take their seats.
How you doing?
Okay, our second panel is former Congressman Tom Andrews from the great state of Maine. He's president and CEO of United to End Genocide. He most recently served as the national director of Win Without War, a coalition of 40 national organizations promoting a more progressive national security strategy that calls for prudent use of military engagement. He's worked to promote democracy and human rights throughout the world. He's worked closely with the National Coalition of Government on the Union of Burma, facilitated the creation of the European Burma Network, and served as General Secretary of the Nobel Peace Laureate Campaign for Aung San Suu Kyi. Tom was elected to the Maine House of Representatives in 1982, the Maine Senate in 84, in the U.S. House of Representatives in 1990, and he recently served as an observer in the elections in Burma. Glad to have you here, Congressman. And then our next witness is Mr. Ong Din, served over 4 years behind bars as a political prisoner in Burma after organizing the country's nationwide pro-democracy uprising in 1988 as Vice President of the All Burma Federation of Student Unions, the largest national student organization in Burma and outlawed by the regime. He also served as Vice Chair of the Burma's Youth Liberation Front, Cabinet Secretary of the Parallel Government, funded by former President U Nu during the peak of the 1988 pro-democracy uprising in September. Amnesty International adopted Mr. Din as a prisoner of conscience in 1989, and his chapter's worldwide campaigned for his release. In 2003, he co-founded the Washington, D.C. based U.S. Campaign for Burma, an umbrella group of Burmese dissidents and exile and American activists. Congressman Andrews, good to see you here.
Okay. We on? Okay. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing at this extraordinarily important time for Burma and this part of the world, and for inviting me to serve as a witness today. You're right. I did serve in this body. As a matter of fact, I was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives the same year that Aung San Suu Kyi and the National League for Democracy won 92% of the seats in the parliament. I went on to Congress. She went to prison. And certainly, there is a lot to celebrate in the fact that Aung San Suu Kyi has gone from a prison cell to house arrest to being elected to the Burmese parliament. But reforms that President Thein Sein has announced should indeed be recognized, but we should also recognize that Burma, the progress that we have seen in Burma can easily be reversed, and that we need to be prudent and clear-eyed because of the fact that a great deal in this country has not changed. The United States and this subcommittee has played a key role in generating and sustaining the international pressure that's been instrumental in making this progress possible. But to abandon this leverage prematurely would be to jeopardize this positive movement and condemn those who suffer and continue to suffer in Burma to more of the same. While the world was watching and celebrating Aung San Suu Kyi's election, I spent that day, Election Day in Burma, on the front lines of the brutality at the hands of this regime, Kachin State, a place the Burmese government did not want me to see and does not want you to know about, a place where 75,000 men, women, and children have been forced to flee their homes because of attacks by the Burmese military. I'd like to share with you what I saw. I visited the town of Liza and Mejayang and their surrounding areas, where despite President Thein Sein's assurances to the country in a speech on December 10th, Burmese troops, weapons, and violence is in fact escalating. I spoke with dozens and dozens of people who were literally running for their lives, having abandoned their homes and their villages. I heard stories of killing, forced disappearance, and death from disease. The day after the election, I asked an NGO worker in Kachin State what was the news from Rangoon, and she said, frankly, I could care less. For the people of Kachin, the election and the declaration of reform by this government mean absolutely nothing. On election day, I stood just beyond the range of Burmese military mortar fire north of Liza, a place that had been attacked as recently as the day before. We could see the Burmese troops positioned on a hill across the valley. They had recently more than tripled their troop presence. Hundreds of soldiers occupied the hill and valley below. Reinforcements had filled in from behind. Between where I stood and these troops was literally a gold mine. Mining operations had been suspended because of the fighting. As we were getting ready to leave, a pickup truck came by with two elderly women in the back. Yi Mai Sa and Wan Mei Lai told us that they had just fled their village. The Burmese soldiers had destroyed their crops and shot their livestock. Fearing for their lives, they hid in the jungle the previous night, returned in the early morning hours to their village to grab what they could, and now they were forced and were on their way to join tens of thousands already displaced. We met La Pei Young Buk, who spoke to us with a toddler afoot and an infant on her back. Her photo I brought to show to the committee. Her husband, a Baptist minister, had attempted to return to her village for supplies. He was captured by the Burmese military and had been missing for a month. She's now taking care of 7 children while desperately trying to uncover news about her husband. Similar stories, Mr. Chairman, were all too common. Others told us about an elderly man who'd been working in a rice paddy when the Burmese military came upon him and shot him, killed him. We heard about a nursing mother who had been stabbed and left to die in the jungle, her child forced to spend a cold night crying next to her body. We met a farmer who'd been harvesting corn with his wife and father-in-law when Burmese soldiers entered their field, ordered them to carry their corn to a military encampment. They tried to escape the next morning. His wife was caught, and he has not heard word about her since. One of the most heartbreaking memories of my time in Kachin State happened 2 days after the election. I arrived in Bum Ring Zup Kap in Maijayang. 11-month-old baby, a little boy named Yu Jat Young, had died the day before. I was invited to attend his funeral ceremony as an honored guest. He had reached the safety of the displaced persons camp after his family had escaped their village. But living in poor conditions with little access to medical treatment, a bout of diarrhea had become a death sentence. The family told us that we had been sent by God to see them so that the world would know. The Burmese army, as you know, Mr. Chairman, has a long and brutal history of targeting ethnic minorities. They do it through direct violence, rape and killing, but also indirectly by destroying crops, livestock, and preventing international humanitarian access. The stories we heard while on the ground in Kachin State indicate a clear targeting of civilians that shows no sign whatsoever of abating. Despite multiple public announcements from President Thein Sein in December ordering the Army to cease offensive attacks in Kachin State, Mr. Chairman, precisely the opposite is occurring. In reviewing U.S. policy toward Burma, I hope that this committee and our nation bears 3 basic things in mind. Number 1, everything that the Burmese government has done positively can be undone. The real questions about who is actually in control of the government and what real power the president might have must be asked. This was illustrated when the Burmese army escalated its forces in Kachin State after President Thein Sein's announcement. Secondly, lifting sanctions on the extractive resource sectors of this economy, precisely in the areas that we visited, could have very negative impacts on vulnerable populations if those living in ethnic minority areas are not protected. And finally, economic pressure has helped to push forward progress in Burma. Giving away rewards too quickly in exchange for too little leave the United States and the international community without leverage. For the people we met in Kachin State, trapped between hydroelectric projects, a new oil and natural gas pipeline, and situated along major trade routes to China, their economic advantages have become their misfortune. Mr. Chairman, my written testimony outlines specifics that I believe the United States should be looking at and insisting upon before gradual, deliberate, reversible removal of sanctions would be allowed to proceed. But first and foremost of those, we should be insisting that there be demonstrated progress and in fact, an end to the gross violations of human rights, including an end to attacks on civilians of all regions and meaningful access for international human rights monitors everywhere in this country. Much as we hope that the recent progress toward democracy in Burma will mark a turning point, nothing positive will last until the Burmese military stops committing atrocities and a civilian government exists that has the right and the capacity to hold it accountable. Just the opposite is true. Mr. Chairman, Congress should renew the Burmese Freedom and Democracy Act and urge the administration to take a measured approach on incentives. It is imperative that the United States government engage with the legitimate representatives of each ethnic nationality and support redress of their long-standing and unresolved concerns. And given the reality in Burma that I saw, the United States cannot forget our commitment to cross-border humanitarian assistance. The more than 500,000 internally displaced people living in border areas depend on these aid networks for their very survival. I understand the desire, Mr. Chairman, to declare Burma a success story. I've been working for 2 decades to celebrate that achievement. But success is not marked by removing sanctions. It's marked by lasting and meaningful change for the people of Burma who have endured endless suffering under a brutal military regime. We must choose our steps wisely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Din?
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Philip Ambaga, and members of subcommittees. I really appreciate that the committee hold a hearing on Burma at a very good time. And I also would like to state my appreciation to the United States Congress for its consistent and strong support for the Burma's democracy movement. And I would like to submit my prepared testimony for the record, and I would summarize my testimony here. The historic by-elections in Burma were held on April 1st, 2012. And democracy leader Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and her party, Nationalist for Democracy, won 43 seats out of 44 they had contested. And now governments around the world are congratulating Daw Aung San Suu Kyi for her landslide victory. But in my opinion, Burmese government, led by President Thein Sein, is the real winner of the elections. Winning of Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and her party, about 7% of seats in the parliament, will not constitute a major threat to the Burmese regime, as they still hold 80% of seats in the parliament, and the military still has a veto power to kill any proposed legal change. However, what they have achieved from the by-election is enormous. The international community recognized their political system as all-party inclusive and legitimate, and many international leaders see them as true reformers. And the pressure and sanctions imposed by the United States, Australia, Canada, and EU are being significantly lifted or suspended. And the Japanese government has announced that it will write off $3.7 billion debt and plans to resume development assistance. And engagement and appeasement will flourish further. More investment and more tourists will come in. And furthermore, this election effectively eradicates the long-standing objective and expectation of Burma's democracy movement and ethnic nationalities, which is the realization of a meaningful and time-bound political dialogue between the military, democracy forces led by Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, and ethnic nationalities that would lead to the real democratization and sustainable national reconciliation. Now, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi has moved herself into the military control political system with expectation that she can work together with former and current generals to make the country democratic and prosperous, and especially to work for the rule of law, internal peace, and amendment to the undemocratic 2008 Constitution. However, as we can see from the current standoff between the regime and the NLD over the language of the parliamentary oath, the magnitude and depth of obstacles she will face in the parliament are extremely huge. So this election victory is just a beginning of new challenges for Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. There is a risk, of course, that she may be contained, confined, and co-opted in the region's political system without achieving anything. Or she may be able to crack the door wider and recruit more and more members of the USDP and the military to join in the alliance of the agents of reform. There are so many uncertainties lying ahead. 2 days before the by-election, when a journalist asked her how she would rate the current state of changes towards democracy in the country on a scale of 1 to 10, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi said, "We are on the way to 1. But she knows clearly that there is still a long way to go. But the governments around the world, including the United States, are now rushing to reward the region with the excuse of encouraging the reformers. I support the measures announced by Secretary Clinton on April 4, 2012, except targeted easing of bans on investment and financial services. I believe such easing of major sanctions will only help cronies, the military, and families of authorities, as they have powers, resources, connections, and institutions to profit from such opportunities. That's why I would like to make the following recommendations and requests for the Congress to balance the fast-track action of the administration. Number 1, before the removal of any financial sanctions takes place, the SDM, Specially Designated National List on Burma, managed by an Office of Foreign Assets Control, must be updated to include more cronies and hardliners. This list should be a must-check reference for U.S. companies that will do business in Burma. And number 2, the process of selecting targets to be eased for investment and financial services should take sufficient time and should be made through broader consultation with the human rights community in the United States and key stakeholders inside Burma, especially ethnic nationalities. Number 3, the implementation of targeted easing of bans on investment and financial service should wait until we see clearly how Nationally for Democracy and Aung San Suu Kyi are treated by the ruling party and the military in the parliament, and establishment of nationwide ceasefire, especially in Kachin State. And number 4, binding requirements or a compulsory framework for responsible business conduct should be imposed for any U.S. business that will invest in Burma. And number 5, United States must pressure the Burmese regime to allow former political prisoners to obtain passports so they can make trips abroad in response to the United States easing of visa restriction on Burmese officials. And U.S. also must pressure the Burmese regime to allow members of the Burmese civil society to found and operate non-profit organizations freely in response to the U.S. granting permission to the U.S. organizations to work in non-profit sectors in Burma. And United States also must pressure the Burmese regime to release all remaining political prisoners unconditionally, lift all restrictions imposed upon all former political prisoners, and allow former political prisoners to go back to schools or resume their professions such as legal representation, teachings, or medical practice, etc. And United States now planning to establish official USAID office in Burma and support the UNDP country program. U.S. must pressure the region to allow international organizations to have enhanced access to the areas affected by disaster or armed conflict. The U.S. must remind and keep reminding to the Burmese region that they have full cooperation with Aung San Suu Kyi and democratic MPs in the parliament, and achieving negotiated political settlement with ethnic nationalities outside through a meaningful political dialogue outside the parliament are the sole factors to justify fully lifting of sanctions. And number 10, United States Congress must renew import restrictions containing the Burmese Freedom and Democracy Act 2003 from Burma. And thank you.
Congressman Solomon Vega.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our colleague, Congressman Andrews, for taking the time to come and testify before our subcommittee. And I certainly want to commend you, Tom, for all the work that you've done in the areas of human rights, and especially dealing with, I don't know whether to call it Burma or Myanmar. I'm getting a little mixed up myself here now. Tom, with all that you've said, it sounds like the only reason why we're giving this step now towards allowing or working, having a better, closer relationship with Myanmar is because of Aung San Suu Kyi's elections. I mean, with all the atrocities and the things that you've said, it seems like lifting the sanctions cannot be justified with what you've just shared with us. So am I catching the wrong wind here? Because not only that, we said, well, let's be cautious. It sounds like let's not even do it. If we're going to really honor the meaning and why we put sanctions against countries that commit military coups, and I have another series of concerns about this whole thing about sanctions, where we've given the president the authority to waive the sanctions. And a classic example of this is Pakistan. For 8 years, a military coup takes place, and because of the nuclear issues, oh no, we've got to deal with Musharraf in a very different way, despite all the problems that we've dealt with. But I'm concerned that what you're sharing with us is that it seems like Myanmar really has not changed at all when it comes to atrocities and the kind of killings that continue to go on in Myanmar. Can you shed some light on this? Am I wrong on what I'm hearing from you?
Congressman, you're not, excuse me, you're not wrong. I think certainly from my experience at Kachin State, as I mentioned in my testimony, they have no idea what anyone's talking about when it comes to reform and that things are going to get better. And as they see the escalation of troops and weaponry and violence, they have every reason to feel that way. I think that what is important is, number one, that we do recognize the progress that has been made in Burma. I met with Aung San Suu Kyi long before she was allowed to run for office. I've spent time in Burma at the time when the NLD was just barely able to exist at all.
Look,
so this progress is
I'm
good.
not taking anything away from the tremendous sacrifice and demonstration of her leadership and what she has done. I'm talking about Aung San Suu Kyi. But it seems that our whole international media and everything that is taking its focus is just Aung San Suu Kyi. But beyond that, you're telling us it really hasn't changed that much. We know that winning 44 out of 45 seats is an achievement in that direction, but we're only talking about 1/6 of the entire parliamentary system that they have there. So who are we really kidding, other than to commend San Suu Kyi for the sacrifices for 10, 15 years now that she's been under house arrest? I get the impression that we seem to be having a double standard here. If we're really serious about sanctions, then let's do it. But the way we're saying, well, let's do it halfway, like giving a half a loaf of bread or a third of a bread or whatever, I'm not getting a straight answer in terms of even from Secretary Campbell and all that the administration is efforts that have been made. Now we're having diplomatic relations, but in the midst of what you've just shared with us, it hasn't changed that much. So who are we really kidding?
Well, that's right, Mr. Chairman. Her party, the NLD, ran the table on April 1st on Election Day. She won 6.5% of the vote, but the military, by Constitution, is guaranteed 25% of the seats in that parliament, and they're guaranteed a veto over any changes the parliament may want to make to that Constitution. So in that respect, nothing has changed, and certainly from the perspective of the people I were talking about today at Kachin State, nothing has changed. So sanctions, I believe, need to remain in place, and that only when clear progress is demonstrated should we incrementally and very, very prudently begin to make reversible changes.
I have 100 other questions I wanted to ask, Mr. Chairman, but I'm going to forgo. Thank you, Tom, and Mr. Dana. I'm sorry I don't have the time to ask questions, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman.
I find it interesting that the NDP party only came into obtaining those seats, which were previously held, at least previously held by the ruling party, because the members of the ruling party went into the government and the seats became available. And I share Mr. Falamavega's concern as to what really has happened here. I mean, at most, 7% of the seats were picked up, and they haven't even been sworn in. There's a huge dispute over the oath. Anybody want to comment on that? I think it's important on the oath.
Well, first, I would like to respond something about our media concern. You're right that international policymakers, international media, they pay much attention on Aung San Suu Kyi, but they will not pay much attention on very big media issue in the country of Burma, which is ethnic nationalities. There have been sufferings of human rights abuses by the successive governments for many, many years, many, many decades, but their plight is almost forgotten. So when the international policymakers try to make the policy, they only listen to Aung San Suu Kyi, and they didn't try to reach out to ethnic leaderships. That's why when they make the decision, when they do the implementation, something is missing. Then you will see the story in the news media, overwhelming betrayal of Aung San Suu Kyi. Actually, she only won 43 seats, which is 6.5% of the total parliamentarian seats. She could not make anything without convincing the military and the USDP party to join with her. But apparently, USDP said, oh no, there is no way to change the constitution. And military said, oh, our duty is to protect the constitution. So
let me ask you both this question. It took but 4 days for a huge amount of sanctions to be lifted, and I refer to the testimony on to your testimony, Mr. Din.
yes, that's correct, sir.
Page on it's on number, but I think on page 3, the AID will establish official presence in Burma. Restrictions imposed upon the UNDP will be lifted. U.S. Ambassador to Burma will be nominated. Selected Burmese officials and parliamentarians will be invited to the U.S. Private organizations from the U.S. will be allowed to operate in Burma. 2 major financial sanctions, bans on investment and financial services are eased for selected targets. This is an extraordinary amount of sanctions to be lifted in only 4 days.
Yes, correct.
What's going on here?
That's why we call it too fast. And then we look at the measure announced, and we thought too much. They're too fast because they made the announcement only after the 3 days of the by-election. And we thought too much because they started to do begin the process of selection of target to ease investment bank and financial services, which we consider major sanctions. So when we look at the situation on the ground, NLD win 6.5% of the seats in the parliament, but there is no certainty, no certainty.
Well, what about, and Congressman Andrews, maybe you can answer this better, or in addition to Mr. Din, what about the ability of Americans and others to travel freely in Burma, go wherever they want and observe whatever they want?
Well, some of them were granted visas, some of them were not. Even many of them, their visas requests were denied, so they have to come to the State Department to get their assistance. And not only American travelers, but also the Burmese people in the exile. Sometimes they are allowed to visit, sometimes they are not allowed to visit. Even they are allowed to visit the country, they have to sign a paper that they will not get involved in the political situation, something like that.
Well, I'm talking about the lifting of these restrictions. Do you think that will include the ability to have more people on the ground and the ability to make personal inspections, for lack of a better word?
Well, some of those I agree that, okay, U.S. Now going to allow the U.S. organizations to do the non-profit setups in Burma.
Okay.
So this is a kind of the encouragement for our civil society inside the country. I believe that we need to build a strong and active civil society in the Burma. The United States organization go into the country and help them to do the non-profit setups, especially in education, healthcare, and social affairs. That would be grateful. This is a good thing. I think we support it.
Mr. Crowley? Whoever wants to go.
Go ahead, Brett. Well, first of all, Congressman, I think if I sprinkled a little cold water on the first panel, you're like an iceberg coming in an entire ocean. I really don't disagree per se in terms of the two tracks that are going on here. They have this diplomatic track that they're moving forward on to kind of show the world that they're changing, and at the same time, it's similar to what the president said in his speech, that things are going to change in this region. No longer will the state be attacking it. At the same, they'll only respond if attacked, and yet we know that they're actually taking their own steps to attack the people of the Kachin region. And I think, in terms of my observation, that from a diplomatic point of view, with even on the other track, which is the diplomatic end or the public relations end, that their move needs to be responded in a measured way. And I would even suggest that diplomatic relations was a measured way. The release of almost 1,000 prisoners and other good things that were happening, which really doesn't materialize beyond, the charge d'affaires we had there will now be called an ambassador, So we kind of all know what the reality is. I also think, in talking before about the hyperbole that's been out there about the great changes within Burma, and much of it has been driven by almost international competition. Like, Secretary Clinton was there, and it was unexpected that trip would take place, and the visuals with Aung San Suu Kyi. And by the way, I think Aung San Suu Kyi was the first person to say that it's not about me and there's too much attention on what's happening here. And I hope and I believe that when she is in a position, whether in Norway or in Great Britain, or eventually when she comes here to the capital to talk about, I think, much of what both of you have mentioned today. But I do think that whatever that movement is from our end has to be measured, and one in which we don't lift. And I think it really is big pressure because of what Britain says, or what the Prime Minister there says, or what happens, what the French or the Germans or anyone else says in terms of their own interest in wanting to get into Burma before anyone else. And It makes me a little concerned about the focus and attention on the competition between the United States and China in terms of what the fallout or the benefits of the relationship or the improved relationship will be. But real quickly, I have just a couple seconds, a few minutes left. In terms of the response, the measured response, what do you think a measured response should be in terms of sanctions? And what do you expect to see change in terms of between now and the time in 2014 when Burma is scheduled to chair the ASEAN conference? And we know that Secretary General of the UN is heading to Burma next week. What type of message should he deliver to the junta and as well to the world about Burma?
Well, thank you, Congressman. I've been described as many, many things, but never an iceberg. But I appreciate that because, frankly, I think that we need to have a balanced view of the reality in Burma. And the people of this country, and certainly members of Congress who I have spoken with, have not received a balanced view of what's going on in Burma. So that's the purpose for this iceberg. And secondly, it was because of the leadership of the United States of America, leadership of both parties, that we were able to exercise the kind of pressure and leverage that has led to these challenges. I was on the front lines of the battles in Europe to try to get the European Union to follow the United States in creating the kind of economic leverage that ultimately they did, which ultimately paid dividends. So it doesn't surprise me that because of great economic corporate pressure, places like the European Union are falling aside very quickly. But again, we need U.S. leadership. Finally, I would say, measured and prudent, we have both provided you and the committee with some very specific steps that we would recommend that you urge the administration to take and that Congress take, that is simply based upon maintaining the sanctions regime that we have in place. Of course, recognize that having an ambassador there is a good step. Having AID go in and assess what needs to be done, providing the means by which healthcare and education and other NGOs that provide these services can begin to engage. All of those are positive steps that recognize the progress that has been made. But in terms of sanctions, the real bite, I would say let's keep them, but let's remove them incrementally, step by step, in reaction to specific, concrete, tangible progress, and do it with measured and reversible lifting of sanctions.
Mr. Sherman?
I'm still trying to figure out why the military regime in Burma has taken the steps that it has. Certainly our sanctions efforts were part of it, but they always had an open door to Beijing. What is it that they desperately need from the West that they were unable to get from China?
I think you ask such a question to many other people, so I believe you will have a lot of different answers. So for me...
So I shouldn't feel bad about being confused about the matter. Go ahead.
Yeah, for me, I would like to recall the history. General Rayburn talked about power in 1962. So when military talked about power, he set up a political party called Burmese Socialist Program Party. He knew that he could not run the country under the military government. So he set up a political party, and then he drew the constitution, which is granted which is a single party dictatorship. So he took more than 12 years to finish a constitution. In 1973, this one-party system constitutions were approved, and then 1974, he held the first one-party system election, and then his party, Burmese Socialist Program Party, became the ruling party because there's only one party. So my point is that
perhaps you're giving me going back to 1962, maybe a little bit more of an answer.
No, that's why I mean that their system, they build a political platform for their hold on to the power. Once they finish a political platform, they allow the people, they ask the opposition members to join their political system by offering incentives or general amnesty or something like that. So when people choose to join in their political system, they will be awarded and they will got as kind of the position here, there, and then they got the title so and so.
I also want to hear from Tom on this. What do they hope to get from the West that they couldn't get from China?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I agree with Ong Din that there are many responses to this, and reading the tea leaves of this regime is a very difficult thing to do. But I think, in a word, pressure, the sustained pressure by the United States and the West made this possible. Two, the limitations.
What were the pressure points? What did they say? This sanction is hurting us. We can't buy this from the United States. We can't get this technical expertise from Europe. What was it that they couldn't get from China that they hoped to get from us?
There's great limitations they discovered to being totally dependent, as they were, on China, both in terms of market, both in terms of the kinds of conditions that those investments being made on the country meant, in terms of taking natural resources and extracting them and putting them into China, in terms of the popular view of what was happening to Burma at the hands of the Chinese. I mean, there are many, many, many factors.
So China had the capital, the technology, and the markets that Burma would need, but being dependent upon China has some disadvantages.
Distinct disadvantages to the government and to the people of Burma, whereas engagement with the rest of the world had significant advantages which they now want to seize.
And as long as they have a relationship with China, they can play one side off on the other, give us some of what they want, give the Chinese some of what they want. I'm a bit confused as to why we would have sanctions which hurt our economy as well as Burma, and at the same time provide development aid to Burma. I realize very small. We give about $38 million a year to Burma. If the purpose of our sanctions is to hurt the Burmese economy, as well as individuals and ruling leadership, why is that consistent with the $38 million of aid?
Well, Mr. Congressman, let me tell you, when I asked Aung San Suu Kyi and others in the NLD about economic pressure on the regime and its impact on the people that development aid support, it was explained to me that the sanction, the real bite of the sanction is not on people on the grassroots level that basically are surviving on a very localized economy. It's on those at the very top, particularly in extractive industries that have been the worst violators of human rights, and the economic pressure on the regime and the military that controls so much more of the economy, particularly in this area of the economy, would have some real and significant bite without impacting those on the very bottom of this localized economy. There's desperate poverty in this area as a result of many, many factors. And that's why I said in my testimony that certainly those who are in the border areas need to have significant and sustained continued support just as a matter of survival. But cutting off
that all money is fungible, and that if we provide $38 million of aid to the poorest people in Burma, the ruling group can then take $38 million they otherwise would have spent and not spend it. You seem to be talking about a situation where it's not quite that simple.
Well,
and that in the absence of our aid, the ruling elites would not be dipping into their own funds and spending money on the same projects?
I think it's extremely important for any aid package that goes to Burma, and this has certainly been true in the past, it's certainly true now, it should be very, very clearly directed, and that it goes directly to the people and the services that are needed. And that certainly is not the government of Burma that will then, as you say, use it in a fungible way to support things that we just simply cannot tolerate.
I thank the chairman.
Well, thank both of you. Mr. Din, this is the second time you've appeared before
Yes,
our
Mr. Chairman.
subcommittee, and Tom, thank you for a firsthand report of seeing different things. We are obviously very interested in Burma. So is China. And I find it quite remarkable that the number of restrictions would be lifted before Aung San Suu Kyi and her party are actually sworn in and a member of the parliament. I just find that quite perplexing, that issue as to, and it's a very important issue, with regard to the oath concerning the Constitution, should have been resolved with pressure from Washington. And I would suggest, And I'd like to have one panel, but unfortunately the State Department doesn't like to do that. It's not at the request of the witnesses, but that's their protocol. And the reason for the one panel is I like to have the interaction, because we've heard two quite distinct and different stories here as to exactly what's going on. And I'm not being critical of anybody here. It's just a matter of the ability to observe firsthand. And Congressman Andrews, which you shared with us, simply, was not available to the prior two witnesses. And but it all goes together to make for the big picture. The testimony of both of you is regarded very highly by the people at the State Department. And I would encourage both of you to continue in what you're doing, to continue speaking out, especially with regard to the lifting of the next sanctions, because that would be, the ultimate, which would be the economic sanctions. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr.
This
Chairman.
subcommittee is adjourned.
Okay, nice job.
Here's my
Thank you.
I'm sorry? Oh, no kidding. Well, and of course you're still married if you did it. That's good. Is that the area that you represent? No, that's just, I was the first U.S. in the south and central. But come on back and spend lots of money.
Good to see you again. Thank you so much for spending
Good, thank you. Thank you. Do you have a card or?
I do. No, I do. This is great.
As he will testify, I'm the poor guy who has to try to keep up on it.
Oh, good. Oh, good. My condolences.